Hi all, welcome back to Azure Content YouTube channel. With this video, we are going to start a new playlist called SQL Real-Time Scenarios playlist. So in this playlist, we will witness lots of scenarios related to writing SQL queries, and we know that how important SQL is for data engineers. So we will learn in practical by doing some hands-on demos and trying to solve some real-time problems by getting some requirements, and we will try to write SQL queries in order to achieve the desired output. Okay, so let's start with the first scenario. So what we want is we want to understand how to retrieve the most recent records from a table. Okay, so let's understand the use case in details. So we need to retrieve the latest transaction for each of the customers in a transaction table. So this is the transaction table, and it has four columns. First one is transaction ID, then customer ID, then transaction date and transaction amount. So we will try to create this table with these four columns, and you can see this column is having unique records, and we will treat this column as a primary key column. Okay, and then we have customer ID, and you can see there are duplicate records, which means same customer has done multiple transactions. So the first customer has done two transactions. Then similarly, you can see second customer has done one, two, three transactions. Okay, and third customer has done one, two transactions. Similarly, fourth customer has done only one transaction. Okay, so it means each of the customers are having different transaction, and these are the dates on which these customers have performed the transaction and made a purchase. Okay, so you can see for the first customer, that customer has done a transaction on 10th of January 2025, and the second record says that the same customer has done the transaction on 12th January 2025. So what we need is we need to get the latest transaction performed by this customer. So each of the customers we need to group by, and then we will understand and we will get the latest transaction. So which means this record we need to fetch for the first customer. Similarly, for second customer, they have three transactions, you can see, and out of which one is on 9th, second one is on 10th, third one is on 14th. So we need to retrieve this record. Okay, and similarly for the third and fourth as well, we need to retrieve the latest transaction performed by each of the customers, and this is the transaction amount. For this video we don't need this column transaction amount. We will just stick to get the latest transaction, which means the highest value of transaction date we need to retrieve for each of the customer IDs. So let's directly jump on to the demo. So let's create the table first. We will create a table with the SQL script create table, and then table name, say transaction table. Okay, and then we need to give the column names. So first column that we need is transaction ID, transaction underscore ID, and the data type for this column should be integer. Okay, so let me put that, and then as we discussed, this is having unique uh, records, so we need to have primary key. So this column is the primary key for this table, which means once we hit this create table script, it will create a primary key constraint, because of which if we try to give any duplicate records for this particular uh, column, it will not accept it. Okay, so suppose I will just create this table. For now I am not going to create another columns, and I'll show you how primary key works. So let me insert into this transaction table, and uh, and we need to give values. So suppose there's only one column for now, so I'm just going to give one value, which is 1. Okay, so one row is affected. Now if we see select star from transaction table, there should be one column and it is having only one record, which we just inserted with the value as 1. Now suppose we just try to run the same script again. Now since it is a primary key, it should fail. So you can see the violation of primary key constraint So this is the constant which is getting created automatically because we have defined this column as a primary key. So we cannot insert duplicates because this column is a primary key column now. Okay, so this is how primary key works. So basically it will create unique records. We can only insert unique records uh, into this column, transaction ID column. Okay, now let me do one thing. Let me drop this transaction table. Okay. Okay, so now there's no such table called transaction table. We have dropped it. Now what I will do is I will create this column as an identity column. Okay, identity. And using this identity column, we need to give a seed value and an incremental value. So what does this identity means is it will automatically insert records for this particular column. Okay, so suppose I will give seed as 1 and increment as 1. Then what will happen is suppose there is another column called customer underscore ID and this is also int. Okay, now if I create this table now, you can see there is two column. One is transaction ID and other one is customer ID. And now what happens is we don't need to insert value for transaction ID. It will automatically create record with the seed as 1, which means the first record will have the value as 1 and it will increment with value 1, which means second record will have value 2 and third record will have value 3. So this second argument which we are passing is basically an increment and it will add this value to the previous value. So suppose if we give 1000, then it will start with 1000 and then second record will be 1001, 1002. If we give this as 5, then first record will be 1000, second record will be 1005, third record will be 1010 and so on. Okay, so this is how seed and increment and identity column works. Okay, so what I will do is I will create this this transaction ID as primary key and an identity column. So we don't need to insert any record explicitly for this transaction ID column. So now what what we will do is let me insert value to this transaction table. Okay, now if we see, you can see we just inserted one value for this column customer ID. Okay, if we insert suppose 7, you will see that 7 will be inserted into customer ID and transaction ID will be having value as 2 for the next record. Okay, so you can see, let me select, you can see we inserted one value which went into customer ID and transaction ID automatically got this value as 2 because the increment is 1, which means add 1 to the previous record. Okay, now suppose if I give value 10, then it will have 3 as transaction ID and 10 as customer ID. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so this is how identity and primary key works. Okay, so this is the basic. I'm just telling because whatever concepts we will use in during this hands-on, we will try to talk about that as well, so that you will get clarity what queries we are writing. Okay, so let me again drop this table. Okay, and we will create the columns correctly. So second one, we have already written the data type int and we are good with that. Now transaction date. Okay, transaction underscore date. So this value should be a date time value. So the data type which I'm trying to use is date time. Okay, and then transaction amount, transaction underscore amount, and the data type for this what we will be using is we will use something called decimal. Okay, and in this data type we need to define the precision and scale. Okay, so two arguments we need to pass. One is precision, which means before this decimal how many digits you can accommodate, that will be known as precision, and after this decimal how many digits you want to accommodate at max is going to called as scale. So precision, let me give as 5 and decimal we will give as 2. So which means you can insert a value, say 1 2 3 4 5 dot uh, maybe like this. Okay, or this. Okay, up to this value you can insert using decimal of precision 5 comma 2. Okay, so let me create this table now. Okay, that is done. Now you can see there are 4 columns, and we need to insert the records one by one for each of the columns. Okay, and just accept the transaction ID column, it will have auto increment values, and for other 3 columns, sorry, for other 3 columns, we will just insert the values. Okay, so currently there is no record in this table. I already have prepared the insert scripts for all the rows that we want to insert. Okay, so there are values for customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, and customer 4. Okay, so I don't want to waste time by writing values for the insert script, so I already have this handy, and we are trying to insert values into customer ID, transaction date, and transaction amount. Okay, so only these 3 columns we will try to insert values, and transaction ID will automatically have the value by auto increment because of identity column. Okay, so let's try to insert value into transaction table, and 8 rows got affected. And if we see the data here, you can see all the data got inserted. Okay, now we want to retrieve the latest transaction by each of the customers. Okay, so what we need to do first is we need to group by using the customer ID, so that we will just get one record for each of the customer IDs. Okay, so we just need to group using customer ID. So we will use group by clause to perform that. Okay, so what we need is customer ID, customer underscore ID. Okay, select customer underscore ID from transaction table, transaction table. Okay, so this is the table name, right? Let me copy it and paste it. Yeah, select customer ID from transaction table, and then we will use group by customer ID. Okay, if we do that, it will just give me customer IDs. Okay, so it has grouped, and you can see only 4 records are retrieved. Okay, now we need to have, let me again write select star from transaction table. So now, okay, on top of that, we need the latest record for each of the transaction happened by each of the customers. So we have already grouped by using customer ID. Now we need the latest record of each of these customer IDs. So for that, we will use something called max function. So max is a aggregate function, and in order to get the latest transaction, we are using the maximum value of transaction date. Transaction underscore date, and let me give a name to this new column, which will be, say, latest transaction. Okay, now if we run this, you can see it just fetched me 2 columns, which is first is customer ID, which we are retrieving by performing group by on this particular column, and then what we are doing is we are trying to get the maximum of transaction date. So when you are using group by, make sure that the column with which you are using group by, that column can be retrieved, or any other column that you are trying to get in the output must be having an aggregate function on that particular column. If this column is not in the group by list, then that column must be present in the aggregate function. Okay, so that's what we are retrieving. First one is customer ID. This customer ID we are using in the group by clause, and the second column which we are retrieving is present within the aggregate function. So that's why we are able to retrieve this particular column as well. So for example, what I'm trying to say is, suppose I also want to retrieve some column, some other column says transaction amount. Okay, so let me give comma, and let me try to retrieve this particular column value as well. If I try to execute this query, it will give me an error saying column transaction amount is invalid in the select list because it is not contained in either an aggregate function or group by clause. So whenever you are using group by, you have to make sure that the columns that you are trying to retrieve should either be part of group by clause, or it should be present within an aggregate function. Okay, so suppose if I want to use this transaction amount, then I can use some aggregate function. So here I'm using sum of the transaction amount and saying sum of transaction. Okay, so if I try to run this, now you can see I'm able to retrieve the transaction amount because I have used some kind of aggregate function on top of it. And what are some other aggregate functions? Other aggregate functions can be minimum. Okay, if I run this, this will also give me some result. It is basically the minimum of transaction amount. And then other one is average. Okay, so if I give average, then also it's going to retrieve some data. Okay, but if I just remove this and try to use this column in the group by, so you can see it has given this error. Okay, so make sure that either it is a part of group by clause or it is contained within an aggregate function, then only it will give the result when we are using group by. Okay, so our query is this one. Okay, so we are getting all the customer IDs and it is grouping by, and we are getting the latest result of the transaction date. Okay, so this is what we needed. You can see, let me run these two queries so that we can compare the result. Okay, so you can see for customer 1, the latest record is 12th Jan, right? And this is what is coming in the output. Okay, now customer 2, you can see first is 9th, second is 10th, third is 14th, and in the output we are getting 14th, which is the latest record. Now coming to customer 3, there are two records for customer 3. One is 11th Jan, second is 12th Jan, and we are getting 12th Jan, which is the latest record. And for customer 4, there is only one record, and that is the same value we are getting in the output. Okay, so I hope you got the idea of how to write SQL queries, and a lot of other things that we learned around this writing this query is what is primary key and what is identity column, and also how to use group by clause. Okay, so these three things we learned by using this simple query, and we also did a hands-on, and we wrote the query to fetch the latest record from a table by grouping the column. Okay, so that's it for this video, guys. I hope you find this video helpful. Please hit on like button and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done it yet. We will try to continue this and learn writing more SQL complex queries as well in future. So please stay tuned with this playlist. Okay, thank you so much.